Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching English webinar for teacher educators. This month's guest is Nelson Arditto to explore effective mentoring approaches, feedback strategies, and reflective practice. My name is Shirin Soyuz, and I will be your moderator today. Thank you all so much for joining this live event. Before we start, I'd like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. While waiting, please share with us in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in-service, type in-service in the Q&A. So you will have a chance to ask questions during the session. Please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We will be using the chat for announcements only, but you can type your questions in the Q&A. The link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive in a few days. And finally, this session is being recorded and a recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. So let me introduce our presenter today. Nelson Arditto is a Spain-based teacher and teacher educator with experience across Europe, Middle East, and Asia since 1997. He has worked as a teacher, teacher educator, materials writer, course director on Cambridge and Trinity programs, and has taught on the MA in Bilingual Education at Valencian International University. And he currently moderates online teacher development courses, trains on the British Council Assured Certificate for teacher educators, and also an engagement lead on the British Council's Community of Practice Leaders Support Program. And Nelson is also a doctoral student at the University of Bath, focusing on online teacher development. So I'd like to invite Nelson. Hi, Nelson.
Hello, Shirin.
Great to see you. Okay, over to you, Nelson.
Thank you. So the session aims for today's webinar is we're going to be talking about what mentoring is, because we all have different understandings of the word mentoring. So we're going to try and arrive at some kind of definition for what mentoring is. Also, we're going to become more aware of the elements that constitute mentoring dialogues. What is it that happens in a mentoring dialogue? And we're going to unpack the theoretical framework that underpins mentor talk, one possible framework that we can look at. We're also going to consider the methodology for research that could happen in research and mentoring dialogues. And also, hopefully, by the end, we're going to apply the concepts from the session to our own contexts. Okay. Okay, so I think perhaps the best place to start is with a story, because I think it's always a nice way to start. And the story is about myself. So once upon a time, there was a handsome teacher, and if you haven't noticed, that's me back in 2012. And this teacher decided to try his luck as a Cert TESOL teacher trainer, and that is the Trinity College qualification for pre-service teachers. He'd finished his master's degree in 2009, and he had a couple of years' experience as a Delta local tutor, but he'd never worked on an intensive Cert TESOL course before. Now, fortunately, he was taken under the wing of an experienced trainer who watched his input sessions and feedback sessions and gave him feedback, as well as on materials that he designed for the input sessions, and asked him to keep a reflective journal of the whole process. So as a result, he felt safer, supported and encouraged to experiment with different training techniques. And his confidence grew gradually, which then spilled over to other programs he tutored on, such as the Trinity Diploma and TILEC, which is the qualification for young learner teachers. So a few years on, the novice trainer wasn't so novice anymore. He became more experienced and now mentors early career teacher trainers who might be transitioning from the teacher role or looking to consolidate their skills as face-to-face or online teacher educators. So that's the end of my story. And here's a question for you. In the Q&A section, which looks like a little question mark, could you write if anyone here had a mentor when they first started teacher training? So if you did, you can write yes. If you didn't, you can write no. Or perhaps if you had a mentor at a later stage in your career, you can write later. Okay, so I can see. Okay, some of you had a mentor when you first started training. Okay, some of you didn't. Okay, some of you had one later, like myself. hmm Never had a mentor. Yeah, I think that's quite common. It's quite common for teacher trainers, right? Unlike teachers when they first start teaching. hmm Okay, so we have a mixture of teacher educators who had or did not have a mentor. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so I think it's a good idea first to arrive at some sort of definition of a mentor. What do we understand a mentor is? So a mentor is an experienced teacher or teacher educator, if they are mentoring another teacher educator, with or without additional teaching duties. So it very much depends on the context that you work in. He also supports the mentee's learning, development, and well-being. So there's also pastoral care, a pastoral role for mentors, and they introduce mentees into the culture of the organization that they are going to work in, right? So they very much introduce the mentee to the community of practice, that they learn about the context as well as about the methodology. Now, traditionally, it assumes a one-to-one relationship, although group feedback is common sometimes in pre-service training programs like the CELTA or the CERT-TESOL. And traditionally, it also assumes a hierarchical relationship where the mentor is more experienced than the mentee. Now, however, there might be instances where you do peer mentoring as well with colleagues who have the same level of experience, right? And they take turns mentoring each other. So peer mentoring perhaps is a more collegial relationship. Okay, so I think we all agree that being a mentee at some stage in your career is a blessing, right? But not everyone gets a mentor when they first start teacher training, with most teacher educators learning on the job, right? So little is known about how mentors learn their craft um, because it's under-researched and mentor preparation programs are very infrequent, with some exceptions by ELT providers, but not many at local mainstream level. There's also a tendency to focus on how mentees learn, which is very important, of course, but this has often been at the expense of the mentor. So, what about how they learn? And this is probably why we've been called the hidden profession. It's a little bit scary, isn't it? But luckily, things are changing. And as a mentor who once was a mentee himself, I feel very inspired to do something about our CPD as teacher educators. So here's a research proposal I'd like to share with you, which I submitted as part of a doctorate in education program that I'm currently taking part in. Okay, so here's a question for you again. You can write your answers in the Q&A section. What is it that all teachers and teacher educators learn the most from? What do you think? What do we learn the most from? Maybe you can write your ideas in the Q&A. Okay, experience. Colleagues, each other. Mhm. Students, okay. Peers, experience, real life situations. Observation, absolutely. Reflection. Uh-huh. Colleagues again, sharing ideas. Mhm. Stories, that's nice. I see lots of peers and sharing and reflection. Professional communities, excellent. Right. Okay, yes. So you've guessed right, right? It's social interaction with each other, dialogue and feedback is what we learn the most from. Now, research into mentor talk has been carried out mostly in pre-service training contexts, but there's a lack of research into in-service and particularly trainer training contexts. So for my research, I've decided to focus on trainers in training or mentors in training and look at how we use talk to navigate often conflicting identities of a mentor. Okay, so mentoring perhaps maybe broadly conceptualized, if you like, or visualized on a client from advising, guiding, and supporting role at one end of the client to critical thinking skills, reflection, probing questions, and negotiation at the other end of the client. And this, of course, changes and adapts according to your context, the teacher that you may be speaking with, or particular instances during the interaction. So perhaps it might be a good idea to explore a little what beliefs we have of mentors and mentoring. So in the Q&A section again, how far do you agree with these statements? Okay. If you agree with the statement, you can write A. If you disagree, you can write D. Or if you're undecided because you have mixed feelings, you can write U. Okay. Right. So the first statement is a mentor is concerned with their mentee's development and not their performance. Okay. So I've got a few agrees, some disagrees. hmm Okay. I've got one or two undecideds. Okay. But there's a variety of opinion here. I've got a few A's and a few D's. Yes, so I mean, the question is, can a mentor be involved in performance-based observations, for example, that use a criteria right? Or should mentors only provide formative, low-stakes feedback? So, for example, can a line manager be a mentor? Does it depend on the relationship that you have with your line manager? So these are things to think about, right? What about the next one? A mentor never assesses teaching or training practice. Okay, I've got some disagrees. Okay, mostly disagrees. Okay, a few agrees, but mostly you disagree with the statement. Okay, interesting. Interesting. So assessment can be a sticking point in the relationship between mentor and mentee. However, some mentors assess teaching practice. So, for example, on CELTA or Delta courses. So the question is, are they still mentors when they do this, or have they become something else, like trainers or assessors? What about this one? A mentor should never give advice or suggestions. What do you think? Hmm. Okay, mostly disagrees. Interesting. Hmm. Okay, okay, right. Okay, mostly disagrees. Again, interesting. Yes, so promoting reflective skills is important. I think we all agree with that. Um, but if teachers are stuck in the interaction, do we stop being mentors when we make suggestions or use our own experience to give teachers some ideas? Something to think about as well. What about this one? Mentees prefer a dialogic approach to feedback. Okay, I've got a few undecideds there. Okay, uh, some agrees. Okay, okay, mostly agrees and a few undecideds. Okay, interesting. Again, this is a very interesting question, which I'll save for later if you bear with me, because this is something we're going to discuss in the second part of the webinar. What about the next one? Dialogic feedback is more reflective than directive feedback. Okay, lots of agrees. Okay, interesting. A few undecideds. Okay, but mostly agrees. Okay, right. One or two disagrees. Okay. Hmm. Interesting. So again, this is a really interesting question that I explored in my research. So again, if you bear with me, we're going to talk about this in the second part of the webinar as well. Okay, and the last one, talk that focuses on development as opposed to assessing the mentee according to some criteria tends to be more dialogic. What do you think? Okay, agrees. A few disagrees, but mostly agrees. All right. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. A couple of undecideds. Okay, but mostly you agree with the statement. Now, again, this is another one that really surprised me when I was doing my research. So again, I'm going to leave you with that, a bit of a cliffhanger for the second part of the webinar. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I believe it's question time now, Shirin.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Nelson, for this introduction. So, first of all, you mentioned teacher educators initially and teacher educators being a hidden profession. This is really very interesting. So, we've been actually thinking about this. They are neglected audience, and most of them, maybe mentors also have not been trained as teacher educators. But they enter the profession after teaching several years. And what is the distinction between a teacher, educator, mentor? So these roles also overlap. How would you define what
I
are
think
the...
it very much depends on you, what you've read about mentoring, what your peers think about the role. It very much depends on the community of practice that you belong to. Um, some mentors may think that the term mentoring is synonymous with training, right? And some may have very distinct conceptualizations of the term, right? So it depends how you see it and how your organization sees it, because we need to come to some sort of shared understanding of what mentors do and don't do, right? So some mentors may think that when they do an input session, they're not being mentors, they're being trainers. Whereas some mentors may disagree and think, I'm still being a mentor if I give an input session, right? If you give feedback on a lesson observation, are you being a mentor or are you being a trainer? So I think it very much depends on you. There is no agreement about the term. It depends on you and your community of practice and how you define these terms, whether a mentor is one role or perhaps it's an umbrella term that has different roles in itself.
Thank you. And if we work with teachers, so we are then teacher educators, but how can a teacher educator start being a mentor apart from um, having this experience? Is it a good idea for them to begin by being mentored, do you think?
Absolutely. And we all have experience of that, right? Because before we became teacher educators, we were teachers and we were mentored by our trainers. Again, when we were doing our pre-service or in-service qualification, perhaps we were mentored by a more experienced teacher when we first joined the school, a buddy. Or perhaps we were mentored by our line manager. Yeah, some people have learned from the line managers as well. So we have experience of being mentored. So absolutely, if we use that knowledge to become mentors of other teacher educators, then you have something to base that on, right? It is very rewarding in my experience to become a mentor of a teacher, and then later on, if you have the opportunity to become a mentor of another teacher educator, because it's a two-way relationship, and you learn so much from another teacher educator as they learn from you, right? So yes, absolutely, your experience as a teacher being a mentee will definitely help you to be a mentor of other teachers or later on, perhaps a mentor of other teacher educators.
And what about the skills? I mean, can everybody become a mentor? Do we need some, training
I
or
mean, that's a
take?
very good question, right? There's a saying that says, not every excellent teacher can be a mentor or a teacher educator. But perhaps to be a teacher educator or a mentor, you have to be a good teacher, right? So it's not a reciprocal relationship. So not everyone may be willing or have the skills, but if somebody is willing, I believe you can learn the skills, right? I remember when I first started as a teacher educator, I still had to develop those skills, and I was very willing to learn, right, from other teacher educators, but also from my trainees when they gave me feedback. So it's something that can be learned, and it's something that improves with practice and experience. So it very much depends on whether you want to take another teacher under your wing. Yeah, you do have to have that personality to be supportive, but the skills of mentoring are things that you learn with time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nelson. So you all earlier mentioned context, so it depends on the context. What about culture? How important is culture when it comes to mentoring?
That's a very good question, actually, because it very much depends on, your institution and your community of practice, um, and how you perceive mentoring should happen, right? So, for example, in the previous exercise, I mentioned dialogic feedback and directive feedback. And this very much depends on the culture that you've grown up in as a professional, right? And where you were trained as a teacher and as a teacher educator. So it very much depends on where you trained and where you were. But it's something that you can learn from other teacher educators as well. So it doesn't have to be dictated by your organization. The beauty of being a teacher or teacher educator these days is that you can learn online as well, and you can connect with other teachers or teacher educators worldwide and learn from them as well. So yes, initially we may operate like our teachers or mentors operated because we don't have another model. But you can find other models, other examples, other experiences by connecting with other communities online, attending conferences, joining communities of practice online. And then we can adapt and we can learn, right? We always carry on learning as teachers and teacher educators. So initially, yes, it's perhaps it's flexible to the context that you worked in initially, but then you can expand, you can learn, and you can and change as well as a professional.
Thank you, Nelson. One last question before we move on. You mentioned dialogic and directive
Mhm.
mentoring. If you could clarify this very briefly also before we move on to the next stages.
Well, directive feedback perhaps it relies more on the mentor giving suggestions and advice, right? So using their own experience to make suggestions on how a teacher can tackle a particular problem or a particular technique in the classroom, right? So we are telling the mentee or the trainee. Whereas dialogic feedback would perhaps rely more on questioning and trying to elicit from the mentee or the teacher what you want them to think about, right? So it's a reflective process that we engage the teacher in through questioning. So rather than telling them, yeah, we ask questions to lead them in the right direction so they can find the answers themselves rather than simply listening to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's move on and then we will have another QA. So please keep writing your questions. Thank you so much, Nelson.
Okay, thank you, Shirin. Okay, so let's move on then. And let's talk a little bit about mentor talk now. So, as you can imagine, there is a tension between these two sides of the mentoring line, right? We have the instrumental purpose, which focuses on teacher performance, and the developmental, which focuses more on the trainees or the mentees' professional development. So this is the why mentors speak, right? This is the purpose of mentor talk. Now, there is a wealth of research out there that shows that mentors overuse the instrumental purpose, also known as judge mentoring, if you are familiar with the term, where mentors may dominate the interaction and they initiate topics for discussion. They may also impose their knowledge and beliefs, and as a result, silence the mentee. If mentors are primarily concerned with assessing their mentees, they leave out little room for teacher cognition which leads to change and autonomy, right? Which is what we want to develop in our teachers. So, not surprisingly, many do not feel that assessment should be a part of mentoring. On the other hand, inviting discussion and reflective talk is generally regarded as good practice, right? But does this exclude the role of the assessor altogether? In most training programs, mentors are charged with responsibility to act as gatekeepers to the profession. And this is where a distinction is sometimes made between a mentor and a trainer. But are they mutually exclusive or not? In some studies, talk which focuses on assessment and advice were triggers to reflection, right? So they triggered reflection in the trainee or in their mentee, which means that if delivered sensitively, it can be an opportunity to share perspectives and reflect together. I still remember an ex-Delta trainee of mine who once told me, "I've never learned so much as from that time I failed that lesson." Has this happened to you? It's interesting, isn't it? But whichever role or purpose the mentor or uses, there are two main intervention styles that are used during mentoring dialogues, the directive and the dialogic style. Now, directive feedback is sometimes overused, like I said before, especially by untrained mentors or new mentors. Dialogic feedback, on the other hand, is generally regarded as better practice because it allows mentees an opportunity to co-construct meaning with the mentor. And this, of course, is important, but if we only favor dialogic feedback, we may think that suggestions and advice are not reflective. Now, how true is that? Some researchers have found that not only is directive feedback valued by teachers, but it also comes after elicitation and reflection. So, in other words, developmental talk features alongside more directive advice, which demonstrates a coexistence, right, in the discourse. So, is it time to reevaluate the notion that these styles are mutually incompatible? Now, dialogic approaches do not always lead to genuine reflection. Again, there is a lot of research out there about this, either because teachers are inexperienced, as in the case of pre-service teachers, perhaps. Teachers are not forthcoming with ideas, or there's very little time for discussion. Yeah? Sometimes we only have 30 minutes or 40 minutes for feedback, and there isn't enough time for a prolonged discussion. Directive feedback conveys a message clearly and can occasionally be preferred by mentees. I mean, I can still remember after grilling a trainee of mine, he told me, "Why don't you just tell me?" So it made me think, right? Mentors use their own experience to nudge trainees in the right direction, but this doesn't need to be done unilaterally or delivered as an order. So, for example, you can use questions like, "Why don't you try this?" or "How about that?" or "Have you thought about this?" Right? It's still directive feedback, yeah, but we are hedging it by using questions, for example. So, dialogic feedback is believed to be more reflective, but my question is this always the case? I think that an emphasis on directive feedback could stunt the mentee's autonomy and cognitive development. But on the other hand, an emphasis on questioning overlooks the fact that teaching is taught according to socially agreed principles of good practice. So, are some things not open to be challenged in discussions? So what's the relationship between purpose, style, and reflective practice? Okay, so to answer this question, it might be useful to refer to dialogism theory. The more I read about it, the more I became aware of how it could be useful for the study into mentored talk. And Mikhail Bakhtin's work was particularly thought-provoking for me. So in dialogic theory, a distinction is made between two types of discourse, authoritative and internally persuasive discourse. Authoritative discourse would be equivalent to orthodoxy, right? A position which is not open to debate. So an example might be the belief that students need to practice the language through communicative activities in order to learn the skills, right? The communicative skills, and to acquire the language. So it's become a truth not to be challenged. Internally persuasive discourse, on the other hand, allows the dialogue to remain open, for further discussion and for dissenting voices to be heard. An example might be a discussion about how effectively a teacher monitored an activity or gave feedback on language. So the two narratives exist in constant tension, but this tension does not mean that they are mutually exclusive, as they are both necessary for a truly dialogic environment to exist. And this was for me a light bulb moment, right? So this seemed to hint to me that learning in mentoring dialogues is not maximized by the mentor avoiding directive feedback altogether, but through the delicate management, if you like, of both types of discourse. Also, dialogic or collaborative feedback is believed to develop reflective skills, while directive feedback is associated with assessment. But again, is this true? Or is reflection or reflective practice a result of a combination of styles, directive and dialogic, rather than one style alone? So I came up with a couple of research questions for my research proposal, and I'll give you a few seconds to read those. And also a couple of questions about the methodology. So what kind of methodology would be appropriate to answer these questions? And what data would be needed, and what data collection instruments could be used with this methodology. So again, while I was reading, I came across the concept of linguistic ethnography. Perhaps again in the Q&A section, could you write down the answers to your questions there? What is linguistic ethnography? Maybe you can write one sentence, a little definition, what you understood by linguistic ethnography. Okay, how people communicate, yeah, in different contexts, understanding how people communicate, effective language, okay. Study how communication works. Language appropriate to the context, yeah, the words that they use. How mentors communicate in different contexts, absolutely. Okay. Linguistic ethnography, it's a discipline or a methodology in in social linguistic research. So it brings together both linguistic and ethnographic tools of data collection and analysis. It's very much grounded in social cultural theory, yeah, Vygotskian theory. So studying the interaction between participants and how that can give us insights into how cultural and social relationships are formed. What about the second question? Why is it appropriate for a study into mentor talk? What do you think? You can write in the Q&A section. Interdisciplinary approach that combines language. Okay. You can do linguistic analysis. Okay. It's ethnology is the study of different cultures and people. Yeah. We can understand how social and communicative processes operate in a range of settings. Okay. You can explore what works and what is less successful in your context. It helps us to understand shared values, emotions, and culture. Yep. And to get insights into how people talk, how mentors and mentees talk. Okay, thank you. Yes, so why is it appropriate? Firstly, the interactions between mentors and mentees are interpreted from the point of view of the participants. So that means themselves, right? So linguistic ethnographers avoid making assumptions and wait to see what emerges to do justice to the participants' interpretations. And that's why we call it interpretive research. Secondly, the researcher spends time with the participants inside their community of practice. So they become an insider if they're not already an insider or a member of staff. They become an insider in the research to better understand those interactions. So it's what we call EMIC research from the inside. And finally, linguistic ethnography does not prescribe specific data collection or analysis methods. And the reason for this is that linguistic ethnographers come from a variety of different professional backgrounds. So they draw from a range of different methods and tools. So in other words, it's pragmatic, right? So the best tools for the job. And the last question was, what data collection instruments could we use in linguistic ethnography? Okay, observation, field notes, making notes, everything. Interviews, okay, with the mentors and the mentees. It's participatory, yes, absolutely. You can use audio and video recording. Yes, observation, peer assessment, okay. Think aloud. I like that, yes. Absolutely. Yes. So methods can vary, right? They can include focus groups with the mentors and the mentees, audio or video recordings of feedback sessions, observation notes that you take, transcript analysis, so transcribing those interactions, those mentoring dialogues, and analyzing and coding those transcripts, and also interviews with individual mentors or mentees. So each method informs the design and analysis of the next method that we use. So we use triangulation or the use of multiple data collection methods to make up for the deficiencies that flow from each data collection instrument. So, for example, the video recordings and the transcripts would jog the participants' memories in the individual interviews. So, using what we call stimulated recall. right? Or think aloud, as I saw in the chat, which then retroactively informs the analysis of those transcripts and observations, because we get a second opinion, right, from the participants, and that will color our interpretation or analysis of these methods. So the relationship between the methods is reciprocal rather than linear. Now, if you're interested in carrying out linguistic ethnography or looking into mentor talk or trainer talk, these are a couple of very, very useful books that I read by Copland and Donoghue, which is about analyzing discourses in post-observation feedback, and also the one by Farr, Farrell and Riordan, which is about social interaction in language teacher education. So using Vygotsky theory in order to research mentor talk. Okay, so I'm going to give you the floor now to think a little bit about what you're taking away from this session, and how these ideas might be useful to you in your contexts. So what kind of CPD actions do you think you could implement in your centers, in your institutions? The approach you take very much depends on what you think you could handle in terms of time, or the participants that you work with, pre-service teachers or in-service teachers, perhaps supervising new teacher trainers or teacher educators, or maybe even doing peer mentoring with your colleagues. So in the question and answer section, could you write down some ideas of what you're taking away from this webinar and what you could do in your own contexts to research your own talk? And in the meantime, while you're doing that, Shirin, perhaps we can take some questions from the viewers.
Yes, definitely. So let me come back. So thank you so much, Nelson, first of all, for sharing your thinking process also. It's really very interesting. I didn't know about this research methods. And so how does it help? So it makes our observations in mentoring based on evidence, right? Not based on our own assumptions. So this is my understanding. Am I correct in my understanding?
Observations, yes. Observing a mentor and a mentee interacting, yeah, either live or maybe they can video record or audio record that interaction. It could be perhaps after a lesson, yeah, with the mentor or the trainer giving feedback, yeah, and then analyzing those transcripts and looking at the purpose of why mentors talk and the style, and then looking at those relationships as well between purpose and style. I think it's very interesting coding analysis if you're interested in linguistic ethnography.
Mm-hmm. So there are also some comments. So I learned that there is so much to learn still about mentoring is one of the comments. So I totally agree. So so I would like to ask you some other questions asked about mentoring in general. So does a mentor needs to be an expert in the subject they are mentoring?
I don't think so. I don't think anyone, and I might be, maybe speaking out of turn, but I don't think that, expertise is something that we can ever achieve, right? We can be very knowledgeable, and other people may consider us experts, right? But I think there's always room for more. There's always room for learning more about your craft. We might be very experienced teachers or teacher educators, but there's always room for more. So my advice for those of you who want to become mentors or teacher trainers is If you have already been teaching for a while and you believe that your teaching skills are solid, that is the time to become a mentor. You don't need to be an expert in mentoring or teacher training when you start, because it's impossible, right? When we first start doing something, we're not experts. We become experts through practice, through experience, through dialogue with our peers. And it takes years. It takes years. So I would say you don't need to be an expert. Start now, and with experience and liaising with your peers in a community of practice, you will be improving your expertise in such a way that you will feel more confident. But that doesn't mean that we stop learning, right? We're all still learning as teacher educators, I think. So there's always room for more learning.
Mhm. So many takeaways shared in the comments Q&A. One was, I've recently had to do some evaluations at work to give my colleagues feedback, and I wasn't aware that I was applying or using linguistic ethnography in gathering my data. So that's really nice. And another comment is, I will work on myself as a mentor first, will improve the way I observe, how I observe, assess, and guide my mentees with an appropriate choice of words. So this feedback vocabulary is really important, right? In that case, because you are also, you mentioned this linguistic part. So can you tell us more about?
Yes. About the language that we use.
Yes, yes.
I think maybe a good place to start if you want to read about the language that we use as mentors and teacher trainers is politeness theory. If you look up politeness theory, positive politeness and negative politeness might be a good place to start. Positive politeness is about praising teachers, making them feel appreciated and valued, making them feel welcome and confident and appreciated in their contributions. So using language that will increase that confidence in teachers, right? Negative politeness, on the other hand, is about making requests or giving advice or suggestions or asking questions in a way that does not impose on the listener. Okay, so thinking about hedging devices, like how about, rather than giving imperatives, for example, right? So thinking about softening the feedback that you give linguistically and learning those stems. Yeah, if you want to learn about that. I mean, when I first started training, for me, that was a very good place to start. What sentence stems can I use to give feedback or to ask questions? So if you're interested in the linguistic part of feedback, politeness theory might be a good place to start. And then recording your sessions. I remember a few years ago, I recorded my sessions with teachers when I was giving them feedback on their lessons, and then I used those to do some linguistic analysis, and then think about which questions were more effective in triggering reflection than others, right? So yes, I mean there's a lot that you can do to research your own talk as a mentor or a trainer.
Yeah, that would be actually a very nice topic for an exploratory research as well. Thank you,
Yes,
Nelson.
absolutely.
And another question, do mentors need to have some sort of training preparation in order to be able to conduct linguistic ethnography? So, yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that because I don't have, I mean, I have some experience in recording, transcribing, and coding, which is some kind of linguistic ethnography, but I'm not an expert in it. And it's something that I would like to explore further in my Ed.D. So I believe that no, you don't have to be an expert as long as you read some articles about it, so you have some ideas, and then you can discuss those ideas with a supervisor or a mentor or another peer, so that you can reflect on the tools that you're using, which ones are more effective than others. So this is what I intend to do, right? I'm not an expert in linguistic ethnography, but I believe that, through my research and by discussing those with my supervisor, I will become more familiar with the methodology. So yes, no, I think it's all about learning on the go. Yeah, so don't be afraid of using something that you haven't done before. I don't think you need training. Do a bit of background reading. You can watch some videos. You can discuss those with mentors or with your peers, and experiment. Right? You can experiment either yourself or with a buddy, and then you can reflect together on which methods work better than others, for example.
Yes, having this curiosity is the starting point, I guess.
Absolutely.
So there was one comment: mentees are observed with great care to explore the hidden talents. And another one: mentorship is two-way communication. It should rely on the common point of both mentor and mentee. So about this mentor-mentee relationship, one question: how can a mentee evaluate whether a mentor is the right fit for their career? Is there something like, having the right fit between a mentor and mentee?
Yes, I mean, there needs to be some kind of understanding, and that goes with the skills of mentoring, I believe, that you develop over time. So there needs to be some kind of understanding on the mentee side that this person is being supportive, that they're listening, that they are being available, that they, in their interactions with me, they give balanced feedback. So a positive and constructive feedback. They're balancing the talk. So this is what we discussed about balancing your style, not overusing directive feedback, asking reflective questions. So all of these are things that will strengthen the relationship, right? There might be occasions when that relationship breaks down, and that's, it has happened in the past. And we need to have the patience to discuss this with somebody who can help us to find another mentor if we're not happy with our mentor. But I think these situations are unlikely to happen if we come to some sort of initial understanding of our expectations. And as I said, developing those skills of being supportive, being available, and balancing that feedback in our talk.
Thank you, Nelson. There is one comment: I've always wanted to become a great mentor. This gave me a great step towards that path. So thank you so much. And one question: which one is more effective, in person or online when we do mentoring?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's something perhaps that I will look into in my own research. If there is a difference there between face-to-face and online mentoring. I mean, these days, lots of mentoring happens online. I mean, to answer that question, we would need some kind of experiment, right, to compare the effects of face-to-face and online mentoring. So I can't really answer that question. I mean, the main differences would be perhaps that there is less to go on from a paralinguistic side of things, right? The camera, perhaps, I mean, I can see my camera here and it's quite tiny, and all you can see is my head and shoulders. Perhaps you don't see my hands when I'm communicating with you, which is part of me when I speak. But in a face-to-face environment, you would be able to pick up these cues, right? These paralinguistic cues. So it would be interesting to see whether that affects the quality of the feedback long term or not. But I would say that lots of mentoring happens online these days. And as long as we are still using those qualities of a good mentor and thinking about our talk, that can be done as efficiently online as face to face, I think.
Thank you. And Nelson, What are some effective conversation starters for helping teachers interpret linguistic evidence objectively?
Can you repeat that question, please,
What are
Shireen?
some effective conversation starters for helping teachers interpret linguistic evidence objectively? I think it's about how we start the conversation so that they reveal
Mm,
what they
mhm.
think objectively. Rather
Right.
than us
Uh-huh.
imposing. That's, yeah.
I think, again, it depends on your style. I usually start with, how do you feel about the lesson? How's everything going? So it's a very, very open starter for the mentee or for the trainee to tell me how they feel about what they're doing in terms of their teaching or the lesson that they just taught. So it's a very open and mentee controlled part of the interaction. Because I think it's important to let them express themselves at the very beginning because they'll have lots to say, whether they feel that the lesson went well or it didn't and why. So I usually say, right, now I'm only going to listen to you, and I say, okay, how do you feel about that lesson? Talk to me. And then they speak and I make notes and then I comment on those reflections before giving my own feedback. I think that's also important to make reference to those reflections, right? So it's part of the active listening process where you're making notes while they speak. But I think for me that works well because it's a chance for them to let off steam, if you like, and to unload any emotional baggage that they might have about their lesson or about what they're doing. And then after that, then we can start the interaction. Yeah.
So, should a mentor use humor as well?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm not one that plans humor, just because of the way I am. I mean, sometimes, I can, be a funny guy, and it just comes through, right? It's my personality. So I never plan I never plan a joke, if you like. So I don't think that mentors should plan their interaction deliberately trying to be funny or to crack a joke or to use humor. It should happen naturally, right? The most important thing is the feedback that we give. So if an hour interaction happens without a joke or a laugh, that's fine. As long as the conversation feels friendly, you're smiling, you're approachable, and you're supportive, I think that's what counts more.
Thank you. So, thank you so much, Nelson. So, it's been really very useful.
Thank you for your questions. Thank
Yeah,
you.
one final question. So, yani,
Yes.
advice would you give to teacher educators who are just beginning their mentoring journey? So, maybe one final piece of advice from you who are beginning.
Um,
Yes, maybe.
who are beginning to mentor teachers or other teacher educators?
Both, maybe in that sense, in who are
Both. Well,
starting
I
their
would,
mentoring journey.
yes, I would say keep a reflective journal. For me, that was very, very useful when I first started. Um, you may have a mentor or not when you first start mentoring, right? But if you are beginning in the mentoring journey, um, I think it's important to keep a record of your reflections. So after you have a conversation with your mentee or your trainee, thinking about how that went, right? What was effective about what you said or didn't say, and what was less effective. If there is somebody there who could give you feedback, that would be great. Yeah, you could invite another mentor, a more experienced one, to observe your interaction with the teacher or the other teacher educator and to give you feedback on that as well. Or you could record those sessions as well, audio record them with your mobile phone, or you can video record them and then do some self-observation. So it's not just about the experience, it's also about the reflection that goes with the experience. So keeping a reflective journal, and if you want to do some self-observation, recording your sessions, then by all means, that's also very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these tips, all these knowledge you shared. And well, that's the end of our session. Thank you, everyone. We hope you found the session useful and picked up useful ideas to reflect in your mentoring journey. So the recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days, and the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive tomorrow. And please share your feedback with us. You will see the feedback form in the chat, and don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter for teacher educators, and finally register for our next webinar on 20th of January. Again, it's a different kind of webinar about mentoring, the art of mentoring, initial thoughts from our community of practice. So thank you so much, Nelson, once again. So
Thank
we
you.
hope to see you again in the future, maybe once you finish your research, hopefully in the future.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.